Good day, everyone. This video is for Laboratory 8 for differential count procedure. So before I start, differential count is actually part of the complete blood count. And to perform differential count, we'll have a short video to show you the procedure on how to perform differential count. But for this particular lecture discussion, I will be showing your the procedure on how to compute and view or count the different WBCs in your peripheral smear. So to start with, you need to use your stained peripheral blood smear. Okay. So usually your stained peripheral blood smear looks like this. Of course, as we all know, we need to evaluate our smears macroscopically using the low power objective, which has 10 magnification, and then high power objective, which has 40 magnification, and oil immersion objective, which is 100 in magnification. So I think this part here has already been discussed in the previous laboratory activities, so I will be moving forward. So again, this is where your zone of morphology is located, not in the tail part, because the tail part of your smear is very thin, okay, and your you cannot almost see your WBCs in this part. Okay, so always look for the zone of morphology. It's still between the thick part and the thin part. Okay, so this is your slide. This is where you put your label, your name, the birth date, time of preparing the smear, and the date of preparing the smear, and your initials. Okay, this is where you apply your drop of blood. This is the body of the film, and then this is where your feathery edge is located, and then this part here is the monolayer zone or the zone of morphology. So of course, for differential count, we need to do a microscopic examination. So as I have discussed in my last video, okay, you need to first evaluate or check whether your smear is well stained. Okay, so these are the characteristics of a well stained smear, and you can only know that or determine why if your smear is well stained if the colors of the different parts of the blood cells are like this. Okay, so by the way, let's review. So this one, what do you call this? This is a band neutrophil. Okay, band neutrophil. And then here we have a segmented neutrophil. Okay, one segment here, one segment there, and this one, another segment, or three lobes. Okay, and then here, what is this? This is called a lymphocyte. And then how about this one? This is called the monocyte. And then of course, you have there the pink or orange granules in the cytoplasm area. Okay, this is your eosinophil. And then we have here your basophil, okay, which has dark blue or black granules in the cytoplasm area that is usually overlapping the nucleus. Okay, so always memorize its characteristics, because when you find this particular WBC, you are expected to know it right away. Okay, you will not say, oh, what is this? Can I look the atlas? No, you cannot do that anymore. Okay, so once you're already in the microscope and once you see a particular WBC, okay, in a snap you should know that that is eosinophil or basophil or neutrophil, lymphocyte, or band neutrophil or monocyte. Okay, so you should memorize or even familiarize the characteristics of different WBC before you start doing the differential count. Okay, so of course, using the low power objective, okay, you look for the monolayer area or the zone of morphology or the critical area of reading before you start your differential count procedure or identification of different WBCs. Okay, so this is the look of your blood cells using the low power objective or LPO. Okay, so as you can see, you can actually see already the WBCs, but again, okay, you cannot thoroughly identify what kind of a WBC is that if you're not gonna use your high power objective. Okay, so using LPO for differential count is not good. Okay, you might mistakenly identify this WBC into a different WBC. Okay, so first, of course, you go through the scanner to look for the monolayer area, and then you go for the LPO. This one, you can see this one in the view of your microscope, and then finally, and then of course, high power objective, and lastly, the oil immersion objective. Okay, so again, let me reiterate that you should identify the WBCs using the oil immersion objective, not in the high power objective, not in the low power objective, but in the oil immersion objective. Okay, this is for differential count. Okay, so once you have located your zone of morphology, okay, it is already where you should start identifying the WBCs. Okay, so per one oil immersion field, okay, generally it contains 200 to 250 red blood cells, and that's an estimate of number of red blood cells in one oil immersion field. Okay, so just a short review. So say for example, this is your oil immersion field. This is your eosinophil, another eosinophil, erythrocytes or RBCs, and then of course platelet, and then the biggest WBC here, your monocyte. Okay, so again, the feather edge, the cells there are segregated like this one, but in the monolayer area, the cells are not overlapping, so you can actually view them and see through the cytoplasm area, the nucleus area in the monolayer area. Okay, and then here in the body, okay, usually this is called the thick part of the smear, and it's not good to identify different WBCs in those parts, because tendency is you will identify or misidentify, okay, this particular WBC into another WBC. Okay, and we should avoid that mistake. Okay, so again, you pass through low power objective and then high power objective. This is the view of a high power objective, and then the oil immersion objective. Okay, so for oil immersion objective, this is the highest magnification for most standard microscopes. So with oil immersion objective, you can actually do the following procedures here. You can do platelet estimates, you can do red blood cell morphology, and of course this activity, the leukocyte differential count. So let's proceed to, okay. So leukocyte differential count is again performed in the zone of morphology. So preferred method is the back and forth serpentine or the battlement method. So This is the purpose of this is to minimize distribution errors and ensuring that each cell is counted only once. So you move your um, your view, ocular view, like a snake, serpentine, back and forth, okay, method. And again, the reason for that is to avoid reading or counting um, one cell twice, okay, or even thrice. And then 100 WBC are counted. So basically, you're going to identify here 100 WBCs. So for those 100 WBCs, okay, how many of that is neutrophil? How many of that is monocyte? How many of that is lymphocyte? How many of that is eosinophil? And how many of that is basophil? So that's how you do your leukocyte differential count. Okay, again, you need to identify 100 WBCs. As soon as you're done identifying WBCs, then you're halfway through the procedure of leukocyte differential count. And by the way, of course, you're going to use a push down counter here, which will be shown in the video, in the demo video for leukocyte differential count. And with the use of the push down button counter, you can actually identify them while having no hardship in, separating this count to another. Like, I mean, in the push down counter, you have their leukocyte, neutrophil, basophil, eosinophil, monocyte, and lymphocyte. So whenever you see a monocyte, then you click the button for the monocyte. So it appears there in the screen 1. So if it happens that you identify another lymphocyte, then you push that button again, then it appears 2. So of course, the push down button counter is very helpful because it allows you to, just identify, and then the counter will just alarm whenever you have already identified 100 WBCs. Okay? So aside from having or identifying 100 WBCs, so say for example you're done identifying 100 WBCs, so you already have probably let's say 60 neutrophil, 30 lymphocyte, 10 monocyte, and then 15 eosinophil, and 5 basophil. Let's just say you're done with it, okay? But differential count doesn't end there. You need to compute for the absolute number of each WBC type. So initially, for example, 70 or 60 neutrophil, that is the relative count. So you say 60%, okay, is identified as neutrophil, and so on and so forth. Okay, and then for lymphocyte, if it is 30, then 30%. Okay, you add percent because of course you are identifying 100 WBC, and then of course, that's the relative count. You don't have to scan all the parts of the smear. Okay, it's just the relative count. Okay, so you just have to add a percent, okay, at the end of the number, okay, for the relative count. For you to be able to know the absolute count per WBC type, you need to know also the total WBC count. Okay, so previously your laboratory teacher have discussed on how to perform the WBC count, right? So for the absolute number of each WBC type, you need the value of total WBC count. Okay, so for example, the patient's WBC count is 10,000 CUMM. Okay, that's for example. So after you identified 100 WBCs in his or her smear, then you're good to go. Okay, so again, you need the relative count of each WBCs and the value of the patient's total WBC count. So just to give you a definition on what is relative count and absolute count, so here it is. Relative count is a determination of number of each type of white blood cell in the peripheral blood. The relative count is obtained by counting the number of each type of cell in every 100 cells. Okay, the results are expressed in percentages. Okay, that's what I have been telling you a while ago. Okay, and then for absolute count, it provides an explanation that particular WBC is increased. Okay, so of course, when you are given only the relative count, you cannot really be sure of the number of lymphocytes, monocyte, neutrophil, and all those WBCs if you don't compute for absolute count. Okay. Another thing about absolute count, it provides a concise summary of WBC count without the need to refer to every type of cell. And absolute numbers of each of the individual cells are totaled, and it should equal the total WBC count. Okay, that's the beauty of counting absolute count. So when you compute for absolute count per WBC, so you have absolute count for lymphocyte, monocyte, neutrophil, basophil, eosinophil. Okay, those counts of those 5 WBCs, okay, must have a total of this one, which is the value of the patient's WBC count. Okay, I hope you do get that. So another thing, for corrected WBC count, I think your teacher already explained this. Just to include this, because since this is actually part of peripheral evaluation, then if you find more than 5 nucleated cells, RBCs, okay, then you should consider recalculating your differential count. Okay, so say for example, you're doing differential count, and after you did your differential count, you realize, I think I saw more than 5 nucleated red blood cells, but because probably we're lazy, then if we leave it as is, then of course your WBC count or even your differential count is not actually the correct count. Okay, you have to consider this. Okay, if you find, or if you happen to see more than 5 nucleated red blood cells, you have to recompute your differential count, okay, for corrected WBC. Why do we have to do this? Because sometimes our machines, they tend to identify nucleated RBCs as lymphocyte. Okay, they might mistakenly identify nucleated cells or nucleated RBCs, okay, to be lymphocyte. Okay, this one is a nucleated RBC, and if you're not keen enough to identify it as nucleated RBC, then you might think it is a lymphocyte. Okay, so if you do identify a nucleated RBC as lymphocyte, chances are that will cause falsely elevated WBC. Okay, so this is how you compute your corrected WBC count. So the WBC count times 100 over number of nucleated RBC plus 100. Okay, so let's say 10,000 times 100. Okay, leave the answer as is there. And then let's say this is 25. You add 100, so that's 125. And then that's the time you divide. Okay, so usually the usual mistake that we do is we multiply and then we divide and then we add. That's wrong. Okay, the correct way is to multiply first and then add this one, and then lastly you divide. Okay, that's the correct way on computing the corrected WBC count. Okay, so again, another nucleated RBC. Okay, so I find the corrected WBC as a relevant part of differential count because I just want you um, to warn yourself if ever you find nucleated RBCs in your blood smears, because you know, again and again that may cause falsely elevated WBC count, and if you report it to the doctor or to the physician that the patient has this kind of WBC, but you just disregard the thought of correcting the WBC count, then you're giving the doctor or the physician an impression that the patient has an infection, and that's not good. Okay, so if you have performed really the corrected WBC count, because there are more than 5 nucleated RBC, then if the WBC is still high, that is indicative of increased erythropoietic activity. Why? Because nucleated RBC is actually an immature RBC. And how come a lot of nucleated RBCs or immature RBCs are coming out from the bone marrow? So again, that is an indication of having an increased erythropoietic activity. Okay, so that's all for the discussion, the lecture discussion of leukocyte differential count. And later on, or before this presentation probably, a video demonstration for this procedure will be provided. Thank you and have a good day.